first glance, Koror doesn't look like the most dominant tribe, and if I'm being honest, the people at Oolong looked like they were possibly even more buff. But speculation has little to do in the world of Survivor, and the reality is Koror ran the tables the entire game, both physically and strategically, so let us begin. Wait, that's the wrong picture. Sorry about that. Oh, okay, that's better. Some may forget that Koror actually did lose someone pre-merge. In episode 5, Jeff Probst tells the cast that even though they are still holding a regular immunity challenge, both tribes are going to tribal council. And actually, it wasn't a normal immunity challenge either, as the winning team in addition would also win the reward of sitting in on the other tribe's council, all while feasting on stew. Koror obviously wins this, but they still realize that someone has to go. And as likable as Willard was, it was no mystery that he was the weakest link of them all, and was the laziest around camp. He completely anticipated his end in the game, and even production didn't try that hard to cover up that it was curtains for Willard. Janu was slightly under-edited, and it felt like every time she was shown on screen, it usually was to show that she was not doing too well. Either she was feeling sick, not helping very much at camp, or just paranoid in general. She sort of made up this faux alliance with the other outcasts of Koror, like Kobe and Karen at first, but I wouldn't really call that an alliance, as it didn't really go anywhere, and things totally flipped at the merge. It didn't matter for a while, though, because Koror was safe almost every episode until the merge, which, like I said in the last episode, is just Koror picking up Stephanie. At the second merge episode, it was looking like the remaining Korors were just going to cut Stephanie, as it was looking like she was trying to form a women's alliance. But it was at this point in the game that Janu was really starting to tank. She was really starting to alienate herself from the group, especially after losing Kobe. She was getting weaker, sicker, and more confrontational with the other women, namely Katie. Then to make matters worse, she was the first person to go out on the grueling Final 8 immunity challenge, so it was essentially a drowning simulator. And as a penalty for being the first to go out, she had to spend the night on a separate beach. Sort of beta exile island. And I know that sounds really harsh, but like that was just part of like the twist of that challenge. Ironically, she enjoyed her time alone more than her time at Koror, and next night at Tribal Council she had an epiphany that it wasn't fair that Koror was going to vote out Stephanie when she realized she didn't want to be there anymore. So, seemingly out of nowhere, she quits. It's very similar to how Austin quit in Pearl Islands, but with one key difference. Jeff Probst didn't seem to be very judgmental that she was throwing in the towel. And at first this perplexed me, especially considering that when Austin did it, he never missed an opportunity to mock him over it. But then it hit me. Austin quit because he was hurting from solely the environment out there. Yet his performance and challenges didn't really seem to mirror that much. His whole tribe loved him and never wanted to vote him out, despite his pleas for them to do so. Janu was hurting from both the environment and the social aspects of the game, and when she quit, nobody seemed to care. On top of that, she quit after the merge, whereas Austin quit pre-merge, so the nuances of quitting were a little bit different too. I'm honestly surprised Karen made it as far as she did. She sort of seemed like she was at the bottom of the Koror food chain at first, and she had some tension with Katie too, but once again, she was relatively safe because, hello, this is Koror we're talking about. Now, the merge can sort of be separated into two parts, with the first parts being the eliminations of Kobe, Janu, and Stephanie. At this point, the majority alliance is Tom, Ian, and Katie, with a duo of Greg and Jen loosely working together on the sides. And then there's Karen. Now, one would expect that Karen would go next, but Karen is sort of a goat at this point. But besides that, the boat is about to rock, with Katie jumping ship to Greg and Jen, leaving Tom and Ian vulnerable. They pick up Karen, so at the very least the numbers are even, their logic being that it would be less humiliating to go out on the random chance of a rock draw than being outnumbered by real people. Well, to their surprise, they didn't even have to do a rock draw anyways, as they ended up voting out Greg 4-2. After that, it's all downhill for Karen, though. It's sort of edited like this is the beginning of a great alliance between Tom, Ian, and Karen, but she's lured towards Katie and Jen's side, too, so now she's the swing vote, and both sides are almost equally worried that Karen favors the other side. Yep, it's another repeat of Christy from the Amazon, but this time, the swing vote's game playing in this episode is a lot less passive than Christy's. Doesn't matter though, because Karen goes out here anyways. Not just because she couldn't make up her mind, but she tried to blow up everyone's game at Tribal Council. She threw shade in pretty much every direction, revealing to Jeff just how much backstabbing is going on. Of course, this angers pretty much all the remaining players, and they all write her name when the time came to vote. Now, this may be a hot take, but I can't really see one, really good thing Jen did in this game. She was in a showmance with Greg, but the division of power wasn't exactly even. Sometimes she felt more like a Greg's sidekick than anything. She glides on through the merge until her and Greg break off from Tom and Ian, as they are easily the two biggest threats still in the game. But their game falls apart when Katie turns on them to vote out Greg. She's safe for one more episode because of the whole Karen fiasco, but after that, she faces a brick wall that's Tom, Ian, and Katie, who had been working together since day one. However, a question of loyalty between Ian and Tom leads to a 2-2 vote split between Jen and Ian, causing a second fire-making challenge, which Ian wins. But what's sadder is that she too passed away only a few years after the season was filmed, becoming the first Survivor contestant to ever pass away. Hands down, Katie was the worst runner-up since Clay, but she wasn't that bad, I guess. I mean, she was an okay or even good strategic player. You usually always finding yourself within the majority despite her being a weaker link. At the merge, she sticks with her alliance until the outsiders of Koror are gone, and then she starts to shake up the game. She secedes from Tom and Ian to work with Greg and Jen, which obviously doesn't go over well, and goes back to voting with her old alliance, even though that was more of a common interest thing than a reunion. The thing is, the thing is that Ian was her actual number one ally the entire game, which caused a lot of drama considering they both turned on each other at least once. But I think it is this link between her and Ian and Tom that kept her safe time after time, and a gracious gesture by Ian at the final 3 secured her a spot at the final tribal council, where of course she gets driven into the ground by the jury and comes in second place. He may have only been the first merge boot, but I think he played an underrated game and is someone I really wished would play again. He had a good strategy and also was just a comp beast. He started off on the bottom, being sort of lazy around camp, but at the same time, criticized the other slackers too. He made friends with his fellow outsiders as well, even forming such a bond with Janu that at the cast reunion, he reveals that he named his adopted child after her. So once Kobe got to the merge, he knew he needed to make a big move to keep himself safe, as the dominant alliance within Koror was pretty obvious. He sees Stephanie as a possible number, but she was just as a person of interest to the others as she was to him, so getting her alone was harder than he imagined, and his means of finally trying to work her over didn't go unnoticed by the other Korors. They ended up swaying her to their side, and Kobe's voted out as the first juror. It was really sad to see that happen because he was extremely close to flipping the game on its head, and had he got Steph on his side and kept Karen, there could have been the biggest Survivor showdown ever seen. Then again, there are 9 left, so he would have needed to get at least one other person from the majority alliance on his side, and that would sound really hard. I think he was one of the most underrated players from this era of Survivor. I honestly considered switching his spot with Kobe, but then again, I think there was more to Greg than meets the eye. He had a good spot within Koror with his showmance with Jen and his connections to Tom and Ian. It was looking like they could coast all the way to the final 5, which they almost did. Yet, Greg came to his senses and realized that if they did make it to the final 5, he and Jen would be the first 2 to go. So they tried to turn on Tom and Ian, pulling Katie to their side, making it look like they would go to Tribal Council with a 3-3 face-off. However, Ian tells Katie of their plan to force a tie, which ends up causing her to flip again and vote out Greg in 6th place. Now, some say that one of the reasons Greg went out was because he won the loved ones visit in this episode, in one of the more cutthroat wins we'd seen from a loved ones reward challenge, and while I do think there is some truth to that, I think the main underlying reason why he was targeted was because he was a bigger threat than either Katie or Jen. Ian and Tom owned this game from beginning to end, but Ian was the clear second fiddle to Tom. For one thing, Tom was significantly better at competitions than Ian. I mean, look at the statistics. On top of that, Ian was just so likable and goofy that he was almost never targeted, even in the merge phase of the game. But the biggest thing that made him worse than Tom was that he made several mistakes in his gameplay, probably being one of the worst game players to make it to the final 3. His first big mistake was at the final 6, when he and Tom agreed to force a tie with Karen against the other half of Koror. So what does Ian do? He tells Katie of his plan, who planned to vote against him that night. But Katie is Ian's number 1 ally still, so she's obviously conflicted and eventually flips to his side. And I mean, I think that's probably why he did tell her, because he knew he trusted her and she trusted him. I just don't get it, though. They had such a good plan going, and he had to blow it by telling someone. That being said, they did expect to do a rock draw, but I'm guessing they would end up doing a fire-making challenge instead, and the 2 vote-getters that night were Greg and Karen. And had Katie stayed loyal with Gren or Jeg or whatever their ship name is, I think Greg would have won that fire-making challenge, so in some ways, maybe Ian did make the right move. Now, the next dumb move he made, which was considerably dumber than this one, came at the final 4, where Tom wins immunity and seals Jen's fate, only for Ian to partially unseal it for a hot second, as he basically lets it slip that if he had won immunity, he would have targeted Tom, one of his main allies for the entire game. This little accident siphoned off a vote from Jen onto Ian, likely from Tom, and he almost went home, but luckily he did beat Jen in a tiebreaker fire-making challenge. And the final dumb move, which actually isn't that dumb at all, it's actually kind of nice. It's the final 3 immunity challenge, which is Tom, Ian, and Katie hanging off a buoy for as long as they can. Katie falls off early on, which by early on, I mean 5 or so hours in, because this challenge is a long one. As a matter of fact, it still holds the record for the longest Survivor challenge ever. It's an all-out duel between Ian and Tom, and it doesn't seem like either of them is gonna let up. They barely even make any deals for hours. Then out of nowhere, Ian offers his head up on a silver platter, stepping off his buoy with the intention that Tom would vote him out and take Katie to the final 2. He did this to make up for his betrayal of Tom, in a way extending the olive branch, and even Tom says this was completely unnecessary because, they would have been good, outside of the game anyways. There would have been no hard feelings, but, still, it was a gesture that counts. They didn't even go to tribal council because Jeff just held it right there as Tom was the sole vote anyways. Now, some may find this move sort of stupid, but the fact of the matter is, Ian would have only made it to Final 2 anyways if he won this challenge, and I don't think Tom would take him. So he blows up his own game in one final act of chivalry, and if he wasn't already going to be high on this list for his dominion over the entire game anyways, that probably would have been enough to get him pretty high up too. I think Tom just may be the best winner we'd seen up to this point. He controlled the game from the first day out there, and it was always safe as he was one of the main providers for his tribe, and was a huge asset in challenges. I mean, this dude is a beast. He caught things like snakes and, sharks that would put the one Richard caught in All-Stars to shame. The first few votes at the merge, he had this calm and persuasive persona even towards the enemy. And even later on in the merge, when he realizes that he's more of a target for being such a physical threat, he always seemed to pull a rabbit out of a hat at the right time. Things just always seemed to line up the way he wanted them to. I guess the fact that he won almost every individual immunity helped with that too. And that's the other thing. He won 5 individual immunities, setting then a record. And some people may recall that Colby also won 5 individual immunities, but the difference is that the merge and the Outback occurred at the final 10, whereas the merge in Palau occurred at the final 9, meaning that Tom had one less challenge he could possibly win. So Colby won roughly 63% of the individual immunity challenges, and Tom won roughly 71% of the individual immunity challenges. In a way, Tom was a more suave and strategic Rupert, and with that he sailed on to the end, where he had probably the most obvious final tribal council we've seen since Sandra versus Lil in Pearl Islands. The jury applauded him on basically leading Koror to a clean sweep of Oolong. Overall, I think Tom was the perfect person to win this season. He played by far the best game out there, and his win is sort of juxtaposed with Chris's win in the season prior, because one won the game against the odds, and the other won the game when the odds were almost always in his favor, and I think both are almost equally impressive. So there we go. We are now done with Survivor Palau, and guess what? The next video is not going to be about Survivor, because I am still not done with Survivor Guatemala. It's been taking me a little bit longer, because now that now there's a new season of Big Brother. I also watch, I'm trying to watch Big Brother from, the beginning to the end of, making my way through the season. So I'm on, a new season of, an old season of Big Brother. I know this is really hard. It's really confusing to say. But yeah, so basically I'm a little bit preoccupied with Survivor right now, so I'm not making, the next video will not be about Survivor Guatemala. There will be a video about Survivor Guatemala, but not yet. Another thing I want to mention is after Guatemala, the next 2 seasons, which are Panama and Cook Islands, both begin with 4 tribes, and I've always done the original tribes, ranking by their original tribes. And both of those seasons, they end up kind of consolidating into just 2 larger tribes. So what I'm going to do with those 2 seasons is I'm still going to have a 2-parter, but in each part of those, I'm going to rank 2 tribes. I'm going to rank people from. I'm going to rank 2 tribes at a time just for that, and I will do that for any other following season that has 4 tribes, but I don't think any other season has 4 tribes. Anyways, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you later for the next video, which is a mystery.